Good evening, and welcome to Live at NYPL. My name is Iris Weinschall, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the New York Public Library. Tonight, it's my privilege to introduce the screening of a singular film about a moment in our history that I know still looms large in all of our memories. The film is the documentary 7 Days in September. Tonight is its first public screening in over 20 years. It's directed by Steven Rosenbaum, who will join others on the stage for a talkback after the screening. 7 Days in September draws on footage from 27 filmmakers, ranging from professionals to amateurs, who all went where news cameras didn't in the immediate aftermath of the September 11th attacks. The result is a ground-level view of the emotional, physical, and civic response to that unimaginable tragedy. As Commissioner of the Department of Transportation on September 11th, a position that I held until 2007, I was front and center to the city's response to that horrific day and the many difficult days that followed. For those of you who don't know about DOT, it's responsible for a vast network of public infrastructure, including construction, maintenance, management of roads, sidewalks, bridges, traffic signals, signs, crosswalks, bus stops, and even the Staten Island Ferry. Its mission is to help all of New Yorkers and millions of visitors to get around our city. In the immediate aftermath of the attacks, you can imagine what confronted us. It was our job to keep thousands of New Yorkers fleeing Manhattan on foot, safe as they crossed the Brooklyn, Manhattan, and Queensboro Triborough bridges and walked the city's streets to get home. We were on the ground in Grand Central to help direct and advise travelers in a state of shock and confusion. While the subways were down, there was a huge uptick in the number of people relying on buses and ferries to return home. And we were here to help them to get wherever they needed to go. And we had to keep the streets safe for everyone amid an incredible amount of street closures, roads clogged with cars, and of course, the thousands of people fleeing on foot. On 9/11, I was scheduled to meet with Mayor Giuliani at City Hall at an 8 a.m. meeting, only to be told when I got there that my meeting has been rescheduled to 11:30. The day was spectacular, bright blue sky and mild temperature, a lot like today. And so I decided to walk back from City Hall to my office at 40 Worth Street. I started to settle into my workday when I heard the plane approaching the World Trade Center, and heard it and felt it crash into the building. I knew then that our city and lives would never be the same. When I think back to that day and the days that follow, I remember it all so vividly, and I know the feeling is true for many of us tonight. Tonight's screening isn't just about watching a movie. It's about remembering and carrying those memories with us into the future. Just yesterday, the New York Public Library announced the acquisition of the Camera Planet 9/11 archive, an unprecedented collection of more than 1,200 hours of eyewitness video documenting the September 11th attacks, the immediate aftermath, and the multi-year process of designing and constructing the 9/11 Memorial and Museum. It was donated by none other than tonight's filmmaker, Steven Rosenbaum and Pam Yoder. The archive, which includes all the films shot for the documentary, is the most extensive collection of primary source video evidence created by ordinary New Yorkers during and after the attacks. The library, with its world-renowned research center and its rich holdings of New York City history, was entrusted with this archive because of its commitment to ensuring that it will remain a public resource free to anyone who wants access. The archive is expected to be made available late 2027, So tonight is just the first chance we'll have to celebrate its finding a new home here. After the film, Steve will join for a talkback with his producing partner, Pamela Yoder, as well as historian Kenneth Jackson. They'll be interviewed by Kurt Andersen, so please stick around for that. Live from NYPL is made possible by the continuing generosity of Celeste Bartos, Manaz Bartos, and Adam Bartos. And of course, we couldn't do any of this without all of you here. Thank you for your support and for joining us tonight. Please stick around for the talkback, but without further ado, here is 7 Days in September.
I'd like to invite up to the stage Steve Rosenbaum, Pamela Yoder, Kenneth T. Jackson, and Kurt Andersen. Thank you, everyone, for being here.
We're filmmakers. We're going to take photos.
They all have their cameras up right now. It's so amazing to have everyone here. There's so many people here that helped make this film and helped build this archive and helped make good work. So.
If I may.
Yes.
So we could spend the next 5 hours or 6 hours talking about all the various meanings of this film, but we've only got about a half hour, if that. So I, first of all, want to ask you, Pam and Steve, about something about the making. I just find how you did this fascinating. So after you had some footage, and I'll get back to that in a moment, you put in this classified ad in the Village Voice saying, have any footage of 9/11 or the week after? And you got 130, 120 something people who did. And again, thinking about that, thinking about so many things in this film, but what an artifact of the pre-phone era. You know, I mean, when, you would have had 100,000 people saying, I got this, and it wouldn't have even been you, it would have come out. So this last moment, really, in a certain way, among everything else, before social media would have inflamed it even more than we saw in Union Square without the hugging, all of it. But I'm just curious about what you got when you got it. What surprised you about the footage you got, and how much of it there was, and what was good or what wasn't, and how the people who shot things felt about having done it and giving it to you.
So people had cameras and they saw something happening and they recorded it in the same instinct that we would today with our phones. And then they had this thing, and so a week would go by or two, and they would call the assignment desk at the local news station and say, I have this 9/11 footage. And the assignment desk would say to them, would say, we don't need that. We're covering anthrax. So the news desks would say to them, bug off. And then they felt, I think, guilty. Like, well, maybe I should have done something, and instead I recorded it, and maybe that makes me a voyeur rather than a helper. And so what that ad, which Amy Rubin's name was in, which we were talking earlier about the fact we never would have put a person's name in an ad today, or phone number or email address. But that ad essentially said to all those people, come to us, and we need your material. You did good work. And at some level, we'll absolve you of your guilt because you will have done it for a reason. And that, I think, was not a logical thing. It was just an instinct that there were lots of people that needed to put their material somewhere, and we needed to be the center of that.
Yeah. Well, the person who says I was horrified and fascinated simultaneously at what I was doing and what I had seemed to be absolutely. I can imagine that. And again, I try to think, would people feel that today when they shoot everything they see 16 hours a day? I don't know. I'm curious too about you were shooting this, or you were putting together the film for television originally. What made you decide, I guess when you'd finished a version of it, that, nah, we're not going to put this on TV? Why?
There were rules about television.
Back then?
And one of the rules was you couldn't fade to black, and you couldn't have silence. And sitting watching the film tonight, there wasn't really anyone responsible for the music, but the music clearly told a story. And those big, long, quiet, musical sequences could not have played on television.
Really? Even the cable age had started, no?
No. They would have
It
said,
was going to be an hour, or, what was it, 47 minutes that a
Yeah.
finished show is, or whatever it was.
With ads?
Yeah, there wouldn't have been that feeling that the film allowed it to breathe.
Right.
You know,
So it
that-
was an aesthetic choice, not just, I don't want the masses to see it.
We got in trouble by holding the show back because the show was already ready to go on the air. And the feeling was we had to do this as a film
Right.
and make it a film.
Right.
So
And it came out a year later to great acclaim, and I'll read you.
100% Rotten Tomatoes.
Really?
Yep.
Boy, I didn't even know.
It's still there. You could go. You could go on Rotten
First year of
Tomatoes.
Rotten Tomatoes or something?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So Ken, to me, what is so great about their film, should I call it Steve and Pam's film or Steve's film?
no, it's really our film.
Yeah, I've also been living with the archive for the last 24 years.
Yes, indeed.
Yes,
It's your child too.
yes, it is.
How's your child doing, who was in the film, by the way?
He's up at upstate New York, and he's doing well.
Great.
Yeah.
And that other boy is not related to you, I assume. That
No,
adult
no,
child.
yeah. No, but our younger son is here, Murray. Yeah.
Oh, well, there you go. Anyway, to me, what's so great about this is how specifically New York City on the ground it is, and I relished that because so much of the talk then and so much of the talk still is the discourse is about the geopolitical national impacts of this and what became of this and so forth and so on. And I just wonder, from a historian's point of view, an historian of New York's point of view, it seems like to me this kind of material, and indeed the hundreds of hours they have in their archive, is very useful stuff, is it not?
Yes, it is. I mean, on the one hand, 9/11 is probably the most watched human experience in the history of the world. More people watched it when you think all the people in Lower Manhattan, all the people in skyscrapers in Manhattan, people over in New Jersey or in Brooklyn who will watch this thing. In Istanbul, people knew more about what was going on than firefighters in the North Tower when the South Tower had fallen. They didn't know, but it was live and listed, and around the world. And yet we do forget it. And for so many Americans now, I don't know, 40, 50 million, weren't even alive. Might as well be talking about Julius Caesar or something like this. So I think there's an immediacy to looking at the film and also experiencing the diversity of New York. That comes through in the arguments and everything else. We're New Yorkers, but we're from all over the place.
Yes.
And
Well, and the resonance for right now with arguments where they hug, but fierce arguments, and U.S. military people filling the streets, which I remember as a weird thing going into Grand Central and seeing suddenly guys with machine guns. When, of course, there was a reason for it then, as opposed to, say, now, in Washington, D.C. and Los Angeles. But among the material that I thought was so great, and again, wasn't conventional news, television news kind of thing, was like the scenes where after the First tower is hit. After the second tower is hit, and oh gosh, this is not just an accident. There was no, I mean, people were just still walking around, just being pedestrians in Lower Manhattan. Oh, yep, this happened. Until the first building fell, it wasn't like an apocalypse film. There weren't raging crowds running north or anything. It was just the normality of it until that moment. It seems is counter to one's understanding of the day in a certain way. Do you know? I mean, in terms of retelling and recasting the story, I had no thought, that was not in my mind about.
I think the change came when the second plane hit, which was before the South Tower fell.
Yeah.
So that there, hours and hours of people looking up, saying, "Oh my God!" Some people were jumping, and it looked like something you would experience that was happening to other people. And then that second plane crashed, and all of a sudden we're under attack.
Yeah.
This is not an accident. This is terrible.
Yeah.
And we've got to get out of here fast. And then all of a sudden, people who've been gaping at it are running.
Yeah. Well, and once it fell, and that's when it clicked in, like, this is not just a terrible plane crash, or because again, so much of it was unexpected, including the buildings falling, right? I mean, it was shock after shock after shock. So back to your great reviews, your 100%. A.O. Scott, in his review in the Times, said it's almost unbearably powerful. And it came out only a year when things were still raw later. But he said, but the film's undercurrent of hope is persuasive. The lesson of those days was that New York's civic fabric, as you said, Steve, was stronger than anybody expected. And I thought of the great Rebecca Solnit book that she wrote a few years later called A Paradise Built in Hell, about communities that develop out of these disasters of various kinds. And I think anybody who was here then remembers as we call it, the September 12th phenomenon. That suddenly this sense of solidarity, as the woman in your film says, these just glances of emotion. And I remember on the subway thinking, yeah, I feel better about all these people on the subway car now. And the American flags, again, now that, that this brief moment of this non-flag waving city, suddenly like everybody like, yeah, nope, we can do that again. And it was extraordinary. I mean, and for so many of us who didn't lose people on that day, I mean, it was, the things that happened after, and all the help, and all the volunteers, and the pure food in the Javits Center, which I was unaware of until I watched the film, there's an uplift. And I'm wondering, when you were making the film, did you have to decide, like, how much should we play the uplift versus the horror part in this film, or was that just obvious to you?
I don't think there was a choice.
I remember one argument one debate on the filmmaking team, which was we really didn't want to, there was a debate about really whether people wanted to see 9/11 itself, and could we simply start to film on 9/12? And the argument was, no, we're making this for the future, and in the future people will not have just lived through 9/11, but yet we're releasing it a year later, and people are going to be like, oh my God, you're going to make me watch more. And that argument went on in edit rooms and conference rooms a lot. Like, how much will people tolerate? And there was a much longer 9/11 day of that got cut down. The original cut of the film was 2 hours. And we showed it to people, and they said, we can't manage.
Take that much?
Yeah, we can't take that much.
Well, I was just thinking that you can't control how different people will, or predict how different people will be affected by this. For example, there are people whose sons or husbands were killed on 9/11 who've never been to the memorial in the museum downtown. I happened to be president of the New York Historical Society when this happened, and some members of my staff said, we don't want to have anything to do with this. It's ghoulish. And I said, well, but policemen and firemen, they have to go back today. They lost more people than we did, and this is their job. And the other thing that I think is powerful about it is how essential, I think that one scene where the guy is arguing with the woman very vigorously, And at the end, and suddenly they're embracing, like, what are we fighting about? We're not the enemy. Nobody wanted this to happen.
I think I also think, sitting and looking at this row of faces of people, the whole like there was a series of the film that got made was at its core honest, and so I don't think we went. It wasn't like we said, let's make a film about New York being awesome and only pull out awesome stuff, and all the part where like I remember loving the shot of the strawberries being cleaned off by the deli worker, because you sit here today and you go, that's a terrible idea. but like everyone was trying to wash things and clean things, and that, I do know there was a debate about whether or not we used the towers of light at the end and how we brought it back to some conclusion, and that seemed to be the best kind of like coherent resolution of the 7-day arc.
I approve of that, by the way.
We talked about that.
Yeah, we did. I approve of the art.
But you called it one of the greatest public.
One of the greatest works of public art. Lots of public art isn't very good, and I thought that was fantastically good.
We needed it.
Yes, even though it's bad for the birds. Another question for you, Ken. You know New York history, and you know, of course, that during the 19th century and 20th century, we had epidemics and big disasters with steamboats and everything, and Triangle Shirtwaist and everything else, where hundreds and thousands of people died. At least since 1776, there were never, war did not happen here, right? So this is a different thing, a different disaster, a different level of destruction, all of it than New York had ever experienced, right? And doesn't that make it like almost incomparable to anything else that's
you
happened?
can say as a fact, it's probably the worst single day in the history of New York City, which has had some bad days. The draft riots would be among them, the Triangle Fire, the General Slocum burning of the ship. But what was remarkable about this, I think, was the way New York came back. I knew people or colleagues who said, nobody will ever want to work in a tall building again or going down to a dark subway. Well, I wish I'd invested in Battery Park City then or something. Yeah. Because the city actually, in a way, boomed after 9/11.
Well, the financial district, I looked it up. It was not even barely considered a residential district. Now it has twice as many people.
At least. Yeah. And also, we could talk about other cities. There have, of course, been disasters in so many cities. But in New York's history, I'm going to say something I hope won't aggravate everybody. But as horrible as 9/11 was, in the long run, it probably does not affect the trajectory of New York City as an economic powerhouse very much. COVID might, the internet might, but this was an event like the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, or even the Tokyo earthquake and fire of 1923. They were rebuilt, or Tokyo in 1945, which was flattened. There's a question whether Los Angeles will be able to come back from the fires because that's different, or New Orleans after Katrina because it's below sea level. But when you think of urban disasters, New York has actually been relatively free of them, and even in this horrible, horrible event, the city came together. People were friendly, as you alluded to, afterwards, and people felt like, there's something here that's worthwhile. It may not be everybody's cup of tea, but the fact that there is a place where difference is celebrated and tolerated, and where everybody's kind of left alone to go their own way. But we need a place like that in the United States and the world. And I think people began to realize you never thought you could lose New York City, and all of a sudden, well, just maybe you might.
Yes.
And
well, it reminds one, there's a famous Auden poem in 1939 or 40, and then talk after the war, too, about suddenly after 45, and nuclear weapons suddenly existed, like people... E.B. White wrote in his famous essay about New York, you suddenly can imagine this city could go. And I remember, because I'm a fan of that essay of White's, I thought of that at the time. Steve, before we run out of time, you said in the New York Times, in the wonderful, nice puff piece written about you and your archival contribution in the New York Times the other day, about about the history of 9/11 and how it's revised and rewritten. And one thinks of it like, until there had been 10 years of war in Afghanistan and Iraq, for instance, like the impacts were not clear, right? And maybe they're clearer today, certainly. But I wonder, when you said to the Times, my hope is that what will come of it will be a total shock to us about how we understand the impacts of 9/11 tomorrow or in the future or whatever. What did that mean? Such as what?
I'm not sure. I used the word. I reread the word shock. I think I meant surprise.
Well, okay.
But
Take surprise.
But we're sitting at the New York Public Library. For the last 24 years, the work that Amy Rubin began and Pam shepherded and a whole bunch of other people worked on tirelessly means that there is more material that is coming to the library than any human being will ever be able to watch. And so people say to me, well, what's the most amazing thing? I have no idea.
Yeah.
I mean, we, at least once every 2 weeks, Pam will say, have you seen this? I just saw this. And we'll be like, no, I haven't seen that. And so like, as I was watching the film, I was thinking about, what's the potential of troops being in New York.
Uh-huh.
And that some historian will look back 24 years and say, well, let's look in depth at the last time there were troops on the streets of New York and how that felt.
Yeah.
And we will illuminate whole new things.
Now, this is going to be fully digitally accessible at some point in the next few years out of the library. Will artists or whomever be able to make whatever they want out of it and just grab it offline? And
So the way that it's arranged with the library is people have non-commercial rights to
Right.
it. So people can watch it and do work based on it. If they want to actually license it, the library's not in that business.
Right.
So-
But if they just want to do it as a work of art, say, and just use tape, is that accessible to them?
I have no idea.
Oh, really? Well, I can imagine.
But the idea is that the footage is there
Yeah.
in its raw form.
Right.
So people can just look at it and absorb, can see for themselves. It's we talk about primary source.
Right.
It's a primary source of that moment, and the film captured a lot of it, but it didn't capture all of it.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
As we acquired each tape in itself doesn't really tell the whole story, but the collective that was built really gives you the shape of what happened. And the fact that we extended it into the other 6 days, I think those days are the ones that are lost to history right
Yes.
now. Nobody remembers that stuff.
No, I can just imagine people wanting to remix versions of it in their own ways, and
Right.
and whether it's
Well-
troops in the streets of New York or whatever, make their own political.
But that's good. I mean, I think
Sure.
that means, generations, the younger generations
Yes.
engaging it.
Yes.
Generations that aren't born and even a generation after that, that would be great.
Yeah, I'm just.
Yeah.
They're going to have some. They're going to have some controversies. In
But
this
you know
joint
what? People
over
also
that.
study it. People also write things,
sure.
So that there's a lot of good to that. Giving that open access
Yeah.
is to say, hey, just take a look at this.
Totally. Well, congratulations to you both. This is great, and I'm so happy that it came out again in a curiously well-timed moment for it to come out again, other than just 9/11.
Let me end, if I can.
Please.
You referred to E.B. White's, who was a writer who wrote a little tiny book in 1949 called Here is New York, and our moderator has referred to it. He wrote a wonderful little essay called, with a guy named Strunk, on how to write a paragraph with power, and he wrote children's books. But he wrote this little book, and I did this enormous encyclopedia. But he captured it in this little essay. And let me just read a few sentences. He said, New York, and this is how New York has stayed, despite 9/11, the essence of New York remains. New York blends the gift of privacy with the excitement of participation. And better than most dense communities, it succeeds in insulating the individual if he wants it, and almost everybody wants it or needs it, against all enormous and violent and wonderful events that are taking place every minute. New York is peculiarly constructed to absorb almost anything that comes along, and this is a lot, whether a 1,000-foot ocean liner out of the east or a 20,000-man convention out of the west, without inflicting the event on its inhabitants, so that every event is, in a sense, optional, and the inhabitant is in the happy position of being able to choose his spectacle and so conserve his soul.
Well, and I want to say, I've never met Professor Jackson. I've been a fan for many years. We didn't talk about this. I didn't know he was going to have that very white book I referred to. So beautiful
A
piece of
well-read one, you can see.
beautiful piece of synchronicity. Anyway, thank you all for coming, and thank you, Professor Jackson and Steve and Pam.